Hello, I'm Venus with Galaxy Inc. And for this week's writing tips, we are going to be talking about killing your darlings, or basically killing off your characters. And spoiler alert, I'm definitely going to be talking about characters who die in books. And some of them are new books, so just be warned, I'm going to be talking about them. I am trying to limit the amount of books that I talk about so that I don't ruin every book. But I also think it's important that I talk about them, so forgive me. It's also really weird, but I don't know if you've ever tried to Google the ending of books before, but it's really hard to find them because people don't want to spoil them. So this might be new information for you. So first of all, secondary characters die a lot in books, right? We kill off bad guys, we kill off people that nobody really knows a lot. We'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But what about our heroes? How often do we kill off our main characters? And why you should or shouldn't do that. So I've got a couple of questions that you probably need to ask yourself when you're writing and you're trying to decide whether you need to kill off a character. And the first one is probably the most important one, which is, does their death serve a purpose? What is the reason why you're killing off this character, and what is the point you're trying to make? Because remember, when we're writing fiction, this is your story, so these characters don't have to die if you don't want them to. So if you're going down that road and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to kill off this character, it needs to serve some type of purpose. It needs to have some kind of meaning behind it. It needs to add value and not shock value. It needs to actually add value to the book itself. Is it moving the plot forward? Does it mean something beyond just that shocking moment? So a good example of this is The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold. And if you're familiar with the book or the movie, the crux of the story is that the girl is already dead, and we are getting a lot of the story from her perspective as she kind of watches over her family as they try to find out how she died and where her body is and all of that information. Her death is extremely important to the plot of the story. It adds lots of value, and it gives us kind of this sense of purpose to the story. That is a really good example of killing off a main character at the very beginning and then having something that kind of builds as it goes. And that book is really heavy too. And I should say that most of these books are pretty heavy. When you kill off a character, it kind of just adds that weightiness to a book. Another book, of course, that most people are familiar with that has a lot of death is Game of Thrones. Hi, my dog has come to visit me. Well, he's very warm because he's been outside. So Game of Thrones, I think a lot of people think that the death is very random, but according to George R. R. Martin, it's not. So he has a quote. He says, and I'm going to read it here because I don't have it memorized. You should be honest about death and indicate it can strike down anybody at any time. You don't get to live forever just because you are a cute kid or the hero's best friend or the hero. Sometimes the hero dies. And if you're familiar with the first book, you will know that what seems like the main character does die and is beheaded at the end. And you're like, whoa, no, who's safe? And through the books, it always feels like nobody's safe. Now, I think that some of the deaths in Game of Thrones are for shock value and not because it moves the plot forward or makes any sense sometimes. So I would challenge George R. R. Martin on that. But I do think that this idea of not everybody's safe is a good one to think about if you're trying to decide whether a character should die or not. So the second question you need to ask yourself is, are they going to stay dead? So this is a trope that I see a lot, especially in fantasy, where a character dies and then they're brought back to life, and you're kind of like, I don't understand, why you got my hopes up, or you made me feel really sad and then you just brought him back. What was the point of doing that? If you're going to do it, again, make sure that it moves the plot forward, that it has a point, that there's something that you're trying to do with it. I think that sometimes this resurrection trope can be problematic. In Harry Potter, In the last book, Harry dies, and then he comes back, and we know that Harry's not going to die. Like, we just know it. And so it feels so pointless. And him getting to talk to, Dumbledore one last time, just, it's not enough for me as a reader. Like, that was the one part of that book that felt very contrived. And I really just didn't see the point. We knew he wasn't going to die, even though it was the 7th book. And even though we knew it was the last book, we all just knew. Where I do think that it works really well is so the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher, I talked about that in the fantasy one. It's a mystery, supernatural mystery kind of thing. The main character dies, but he is brought back. But he's brought back as a ghost, and he has to solve his own murder. So I thought that was clever. Because you've already set up a world that has these supernatural elements and has ghosts and things like that. They're not called ghosts, but it allows you to kind of take that, oh my gosh, he killed the main character, but then turn it on its head a little bit. Atonement, we are thrown off because you get this long, beautiful love story about these characters, and then you find out that the character never lived, that it's all a made-up fantasy story and the character died. And that's a way of kind of turning that on its head too, and it's very clever and so sad. And so if you're going to do it, if you're going to bring them back from the dead, make it clever and interesting. Don't just kill them and then he was brought back from the brink of death at the last minute. So the third one that I would say is the character you're going to kill insignificant? Because I mentioned at the beginning of the video that we kill off a lot of secondary characters and villains. Like, it's pretty common. And the problem with that is that sometimes we kill off characters that it seems like their only purpose in the story is to die. Like, they were created in order to be a foil for the main character so that they could die. I have a very difficult time with the third Hunger Games book. I have a very difficult time with Katniss in general because I feel like she's a very reactionary character and not very heroic on her own. Something always has to happen to her outside of her to be a catalyst for her to change or to want to do something. And I don't like characters like that. And in the third book, her sister dies, and that is the catalyst for her finally, leading the charge against the Capitol. Even though she kind of been doing some of that work, she'd been doing it so reluctantly, and that was finally the thing. And it felt like that the only point of that character throughout the story was to get Katniss to do stuff. From the first book when she's like, I volunteer as tribute, to the very end, the only point of Katniss' sister is for us to feel bad for her and to pity her. And then in the end, when she dies, it's like, well, of course she was going to die. Katniss wasn't going to do anything if she didn't. When you're talking about the significance or insignificance of a character is, are you, like the red shirts in Star Trek, are you just creating characters to kill them off? Are you creating characters that live and breathe and then it makes sense when they die because, nobody would survive that. But you also have to do that for your main characters too. Having a character get shot 8 times and then them be like, it's just a flesh wound, probably is not very realistic. So that is going to be my 5th one is it realistic? If your characters, you've watched movies and like they're getting shot at and things are happening, you're like, how are these people not dead? Like, they've got to die, right? Like, there's nobody who would survive this much firefight or whatever. Or showing characters around them dying, I guess would be a good one. But like the main character somehow manages to make it out of a really hellish situation and not a scrape on him, or recovers super quickly from like a gunshot wound. So you make it as realistic as possible. And so that's the thing. If you're throwing your characters into situations in which it would be so unrealistic for them to survive it, then you either need to dial back what situation they're in, or you need to really think about, how your character would handle this and whether they would die or not, Historicity is a difficult one because we write books about the Holocaust, and we know that not a lot of people survived. Like, millions of people died. And so when you're writing a story that's set in that time period, it feels fitting that some of your main characters, if not all of them, will pass away. I think of The Devil's Arithmetic by Jane Yolen, or The Book Thief by Marcus Zuzak, or The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, all books that our main characters experience significant amounts of death. Talking about real people, of course, we want to make sure that real events show what really happened. But we also need to keep in mind also that even if you're writing something completely fictional, but people die from cancer and accidents and fires. I think of The Outsiders, Bridge to Terabithia, Charlotte's Web, where we're showing kind of the reality, of the situation. And I think that that's okay too, but you need to think about it. Now, I think the majority of books where characters don't die is perfectly fine. I think that it's part of the fun and of a journey of a book is to have characters that manage to survive to the end, because we want to root for characters and we want to love them and we want to return to other books. That's why we read series of book after book. And yeah, sure. I've talked a lot about this series here, L.A. Meyer's the Bloody Jack series. And as much as I love these books, there's no way this girl would have survived all of the stuff that happens in this series. But I enjoy it anyways because it's a lot of fun. So you don't have to kill off your characters. But I think that it is important to ask yourself those questions so that you're aware of what you're doing and that you're making kind of informed decisions. And again, and this is my biggest caution for authors, don't kill just for shock value. But I caution you to not fall into the trap of just killing off people just for the fun of it because, you feel like somebody needs to die in your book or something. It's okay if they don't. Readers will keep reading as long as it feels believable. Don't forget to press like and subscribe to my channel. I post new writing tip videos almost every Friday. I've been Venus, the Galaxy Ink. I hope your writing is out of this world.